Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves was one of my favorite movies of 2023. The film does a great job at packing in a bunch of references to the game and Easter eggs for hardcore fans, while not alienating audience members who have never played D&D before. By all accounts, it was a fantastic blockbuster that appealed to the widest audience possible. But it was also a flop, only grossing $200 million against a $150 million budget. So, today I want to examine this film to try and understand why it flopped and why I think it deserved better. A proper Dungeons & Dragons movie had been in development for years before we finally got to see one on the big screen in 2023. I say proper because there was a D&D movie back in 2000, but it was terrible and no one liked it and we're not talking about it. However, the film we now know as Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves had been in production hell since 2013, with it jumping around to tons of different studios and directors. It all started on May 7th, 2013, when Warner Brothers announced that they were making a movie based on the popular tabletop role-playing game. But 2 days later, the company that owned D&D, Hasbro, issued a lawsuit and said that they were already co-producing a movie at Universal Studios. This legal battle continued for 2 years until a deal was settled and Warner Brothers continued with the film's development, working alongside Hasbro. In 2016, it was announced Rob Letterman was brought on to direct the film, with a script that was written by David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick. However, this version of the film was dropped and the whole project was moved by Hasbro to Paramount Pictures instead. At the time, actor Joe Manganiello, who is a huge fan of D&D, announced he had written his own script for a Dungeons & Dragons movie, with big names like Dwayne Johnson in negotiations to help develop it. However, that script never got anywhere. Over at Paramount Pictures, the release date of July 23, 2021 was set. However, this date bounced around a lot throughout its production. Director Chris McKay was in negotiations to helm the project, with Michael Gillio penning the script. By 2019, the first draft of the script was completed, but Chris McKay was no longer in conversation for the director's chair. The director duties finally landed on the duo Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daley, who had picked up the reins after having just left the Flash movie. They really dodged a bullet there. In 2020, Goldstein and Daley announced that they had co-written a new draft of Michael Gillio's original script, and Chris Pine was announced to star in the film. Later that year, the film's release date was delayed to May 27, 2022 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The rest of the cast was filled out in the beginning of 2021, and the film finally went into production in April of that year. The film was then delayed once again to March 3, 2023. In order to prepare for filming, the cast actually played a session as their characters, both as a bonding exercise and to understand the mechanics of the game. That session also informed the director's takes on the characters. During post-production, the film was delayed for a final time with the final release date of March 31st, 2023. The film made its debut at the South by Southwest Film Festival on March 10th, 2023, and it had its theatrical release at the end of the month. The film received great reviews from both critics and fans alike. It currently holds a 91% critic and a 93% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with a 3.5 on Letterboxd. Although it was well received, it didn't quite make a splash at the box office like it was supposed to. In its opening weekend, it made $37 million. It went on to gross $93 million domestically and $114 million overseas, for a total gross of $208 million. Movies usually need to double their budget in order to break even, because marketing, distribution, taxes, royalties are not accounted into that original figure. And with a reported budget of $150 million, this means that the film was a certified flop. So what gives? Why did a fun, well-received, family-friendly film based on a beloved property underperform at the box office? Well, there's a few reasons. The failure of Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves at the box office can really be boiled down into 3 reasons: poor marketing, tough competition, and a boneheaded move by Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro that resulted in a boycott. For context, Wizards of the Coast is the company that owns Dungeons & Dragons, but we'll get to that later. First is the poor marketing. By the time this film came out, not very many people knew about it, and it had a small commercial presence. Like I said earlier, usually movies need to double their budget to account for marketing, but maybe Paramount was trying to counteract this huge production budget by not investing the proper money into marketing. This would make sense judging by the weak marketing campaign. Personally, I don't think the trailers for this movie did the film justice, and I'm sure a lot of other people would agree with me. The trailers portrayed this movie as a run-of-the-mill forgettable blockbuster, not showing off the aspects that made it interesting or different. The trailers were trying too hard to be a Marvel movie. From the use of a remixed classic rock song, to the group of misfits cliche, to the use of cheesy "so that just happened" Marvel humor. There is great comedy in this movie, but the jokes they decide to use in the trailer were some of the most basic ones. I remember I had to convince my friends to see this movie with me, because the original trailers turned them off. I wasn't fully sold on this film myself until I saw the clip of them asking the corpse questions, which was a great scene and captured the spirit of D&D perfectly. Tough competition at the box office was a huge deciding factor in this film's success, as it came out between two already established IPs. This movie was released 1 week after John Wick 4 and 1 week before the Super Mario Bros. Movie, both of which dominated at the box office. The Mario movie was the second highest grossing movie of 2023, right behind Barbie, making $1.3 billion in its theatrical run. It totally buried the D&D movie, especially due to the fact that these movies shared the same intended audience. They are both action-adventure films that are meant to be enjoyed by families, and it seemed like Mario had better name recognition to the general audience. Not only did this film fail at scoring the family film demographic, but the film also lost its other big demographic, which is die-hard Dungeons & Dragons fans. These are the fans who buy all the books, know all the lore, and play every weekend. It may seem weird to outsiders that hardcore D&D fans didn't see a D&D movie, but this is due to a boycott that was happening in the community during this film's release. Months before the movie came out, a new revision to the company's open game license was leaked among the community that immediately faced widespread backlash. For those unaware of what the open game license is, I'll try my best to briefly explain. The Open Game License, or OGL, is a public copyright license by Wizards of the Coast that may be used by tabletop role-playing game developers to grant permission to modify, copy, and redistribute some of the content designed for their games, notably game mechanics. However, they must share alike copies and derivative works. Basically, this means that although Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons & Dragons, any member of the public can copy, use, modify it, and publish it under the same license as long as they follow a set of rules. This is the license that allows third-party content to be made and sold by community creators. In addition to invalidating the old OGL, this new revision of the OGL came with a lot of controversial amendments. These included an amendment that said products using the OGL, which earn over $750 million per year, must pay Wizards of the Coast a royalty fee of 25% of all income beyond that point. This new version also allowed Wizards of the Coast to take any homebrew content that was made by fans and publish it as their own without permission or compensation by the original creator. Also, all content made on the old OGL must be moved to the new one, or the content creators would be at risk of being sued. This is a very brief overview of a complex issue, as I just scratched the surface. But if you want to learn more, I'll link a video by Dungeon Dudes that goes into more depth. It's on screen or in the description. Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro eventually walked back this terrible decision, but it was too little too late. This new OGL destroyed all goodwill that the company had built up for decades, and resulted in a boycott by a large majority of the community. It was a horrible decision led by greed and resulted in a lot of D&D fans not going out to see the movie. Pissing off your most diehard fans right before you release a movie was beyond stupid. Another aspect that I think contributed to this film's failure is that the budget was too big for how niche D&D is. Dungeons & Dragons is very popular, and people know what it is, but that doesn't mean you can dump the same amount of money into the budget that other popular franchises like Marvel and DC can. The fan base for D&D is small comparatively, and if they would have stuck with a smaller budget, then I think they would have had better luck at the box office. As I stated in the beginning of this video, this movie is so great because both hardcore fans and average viewers can enjoy it. I saw this movie with 3 of my friends. Out of our group, 2 of us were hardcore fans, and 2 of us had never played before. We all walked away loving this movie. And it really surprised my friends who are not D&D fans because they weren't expecting it to be good. I think this movie fell into the same category as the Lego Movie. It's a movie that people thought would suck and just be used to push another product, but it ended up being lots of fun and surprisingly heartfelt. If you look at a lot of reviews online, the one sentiment you see people constantly say is how the film surprised them because of how good it was. I think it was so effective because the filmmakers hit the perfect tone to make this film work. This movie is a lighthearted action adventure with plenty of great comedy and great action. It's not taking itself too seriously or pretending to be more deep than it really is. At its core, the goal of this film is to be fun and entertaining, and it succeeds. As co-director Jonathan Goldstein said in an interview with Den of Geek, ours is a movie that doesn't take itself with great seriousness. But it's never a spoof. It honors the world of D&D and celebrates it, but hopefully it gives the audience an engaging and fun ride. This film also does a perfect job at capturing how Dungeons & Dragons campaigns usually go. One way the filmmakers do this is by having our main characters make plans that fail, and then the characters have to adapt on the fly. It gives the film a sense of realism in regards to the tabletop game, because while playing D&D, you're going to have a lot of bad rolls while playing, which requires you, other players, and the dungeon master to make stuff up on the spot. There's a lot of great examples of this throughout the film. There's the classic scene of the group trying to sneak into the castle, with the plan failing pretty much right away and then having to fight their way in. There's the scene of the DM PC explaining the overcomplicated trap, and then a player screwing it up before he can even finish, and then they have to brainstorm a different plan. And of course, my favorite scene is in the graveyard, where they have to keep interviewing different corpses to find out where a magical item went. It's so much fun to see our heroes fail and adapt to different plans on the fly. Not only does this make the film true to D&D, but it also distinguishes itself from other fantasy movies. The film also captures the spirit of D&D because you can practically feel the dice rolls on the screen. Those who have played D&D know exactly what I'm talking about. A great example is the scene of where Edgin and Holga are escaping from the guards. You can tell Holga is rolling 20s the entire time while Edgin is rolling 1s. The choice to make this film a heist movie rather than a big fantasy epic also works in the film's favor. It's a subgenre that is usually not explored in most fantasy movies, and it allows us to focus on the characters in the comedy because we're not so bogged down with lore and world building. There's plenty of lore in this movie, but it's not so complicated that non-D&D fans are going to be turned off. But there's still just enough for fans to perk up in their seats and point at the screen. I remember when I saw this film, I kept looking at my other D&D friend whenever they mentioned something like Neverwinter or Baldur's Gate, or whenever a Dragonborn or a Tabaxi was on screen. It made me giddy because I saw these things I recognized and played as in the game. It felt like the creatives behind this film loved D&D and respected it as much as we did. This love and attention to detail is noticeable in every aspect of the movie, from the world building to the costume design. The book that was released with the film, The Art and Making of Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves, gives excellent insight into just how much work went into this movie. I highly recommend checking it out if you get the chance, as it also shows concept art and stuff we could have seen in the sequel, like a Beholder. But unfortunately, we may never get to see that sequel. In an interview with Variety in July of last year, Paramount Pictures CEO Brian Robbins stated that a sequel is possible, but it would have to be made with a smaller budget. Personally, I don't think we'll ever see this come into fruition, but there's still hope, especially if fans keep streaming this movie and keep talking about it. There was also a spin-off television series being developed at Paramount Plus, but last month it was announced that it was no longer moving forward. Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves was an excellent film that deserved more attention at the box office. Unfortunately, due to poor marketing, a bad release schedule, and a boycott by the fans resulted in a lackluster box office performance, which is a shame because it did everything right to appeal to both fans of the game and casual viewers. This movie is brilliant and so well done. Every time I think of this movie, I'm just reminded of how good it is and how we'll probably never get to see a sequel, and then I just get pissed off. This film deserved so much better, and it's truly a shame it didn't hit the box office the way it should have. So, those are my thoughts on Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. What did you think of the movie? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.